The music stopped. 200 faces turned toward the center of the grand ballroom room as champagne glasses froze mid-toast and laughter died in throats still shaped for joy. The annual Harvest Gala, Montana's most prestigious gathering of wolf packs from 3 territories, held its collective breath. On the polished marble floor between tables draped in gold silk and candelabras burning with 100 flames, a girl knelt in spreading blood. Elara Stone, 19 years old and nobody's concern, pressed trembling fingers against her thigh, where glass had buried itself deep. The champagne flute she'd been carrying lay shattered around her in glittering pieces. Her gray servant's dress darkened with crimson that pooled beneath her knees, reflecting candlelight like scattered rubies. She had felt the push. Seraphine's hand between her shoulder blades, carefully hidden behind a cascade of golden curls and a smile bright as winter sun. The tray had tilted. The glasses had fallen, and Elara had gone down with them onto her knees, onto the broken shards, into pain that stole her breath and painted the world white at its edges. Around her, silk rustled. Leather boots shifted on marble. Expensive perfumes mingled with the copper scent of her blood and the lingering aroma of roasted venison from dinner. No one moved to help. No one ever did. Servants who fell were meant to disappear, quietly replaced by others who would not make such clumsy mistakes. Elara tried to stand, her leg buckled. The glass had gone deeper than she thought, severing something important. Heat spread down her calves, soaking into her worn stockings. The pain arrived in waves, each one larger than the last, crashing against the walls she'd built over 12 years of learning to stay silent. She looked up through tears she refused to shed. 200 wolves in their finest evening wear stared back with expressions ranging from mild distaste to complete indifference. This was the natural order, the hierarchy that governed everything. Alphas stood at the top in their tailored suits and designer gowns. Betas filled the middle ranks, managing the businesses and battalions that kept the territories running. And Omegas like her existed at the bottom, scrubbing floors and serving food and bleeding quietly when accidents happened. Through the crowd, Seraphine Blackwell watched with eyes like green ice, her lips curved in satisfaction. 23 years old and beautiful as poisoned honey, the Alpha King's younger sister wore a gown of emerald silk that cost more than Elara would earn in 10 lifetimes. Diamonds glittered at her throat, her blonde hair fell in perfect waves down her back, and her smile said what her mouth would never speak aloud in front of witnesses. This is what happens when you exist where you shouldn't. Elara's vision blurred. The ballroom tilted sideways. She tasted metal sharp and wrong and realized she'd bitten through her lip, trying not to scream. Each heartbeat pumped more blood onto pristine marble that had probably never seen such a mess. Get up, her mind whispered. Crawl if you have to. Disappear before someone important notices. Before Corwin comes with his cold eyes and colder punishments for servants who make scenes at formal events. Her hands found purchase on slick stone. Her right leg dragged uselessly behind her as she tried to move, leaving a crimson trail. The glass ground deeper with every shift of weight. Somewhere in the watching crowd, someone laughed. The sound cut worse than any blade. Then footsteps rang across the ballroom floor. Not the quick, efficient steps of servants coming to clean up the problem. Not Corwin's measured stride that always preceded pain. These footsteps were heavy, deliberate, each one striking marble with the weight of absolute authority. The crowd parted, and Theron Blackwell, Alpha King of the Montana Territories, descended from his throne. Elara's world narrowed to those approaching boots. Black leather polished to a mirror shine, stopping 3 feet from where she knelt in her own blood. Her training screamed at her to lower her eyes, to make herself smaller, to apologize for existing in his line of sight. But shock held her frozen, staring up at a man she'd only ever glimpsed from corners and shadows. He stood 6 feet 5 inches of controlled power, wrapped in a midnight suit that fit like armor. Broad shoulders that had won wars, hands that had broken armies. A face carved from granite in winter storms, all sharp angles and harder edges, with a jaw that could cut glass and eyes the color of liquid silver. Those eyes found hers, and the ballroom disappeared. 7 years ago, Theron Blackwell had been poisoned in battle by an enemy who'd known exactly where to strike. Shadow poison, the healers had called it. A toxin brewed from wolfsbane and darker things, designed to eat away at an alpha's strength from the inside out. It turned veins black beneath the skin, made every breath a labor, transformed sleep into a battlefield where his wolf screamed in endless agony. He'd killed the enemy who'd done it, conquered their territories, burned their bloodline from history. But the corruption remained, spreading slowly through his system like ink in water, and every healer in 3 territories had said the same thing. Nothing stops it. Nothing cures it. 3 months, maybe less, before it reaches your heart. Theron had ruled from his throne for 7 years, with death living in his veins, growing stronger while he grew weaker. He'd hidden it well. Alphas didn't show vulnerability. Kings didn't admit to dying. But Alara could see it now at this impossible distance. The dark lines threading beneath his collar. The slight tremor in his left hand. The way he held himself too carefully, like a man carrying something fragile that might shatter. He looked down at her and something shifted in his expression. Confusion flickered across features that had forgotten how to show anything but cold command. His nostrils flared, his pupils dilated, and his hand the one that trembled with the toxin's touch went absolutely still. The entire ballroom held its breath. Theron Blackwell, who knelt for no one except at coronations and funerals, who'd killed 100 enemies without mercy, who ruled 3 territories with absolute authority, dropped to his knees in Alara's blood. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Silk rustled in shock. Someone dropped a glass. The sound of crystal shattering echoed the impossible scene unfolding on the ballroom floor. "You're hurt." His voice was gravel and smoke roughened by years of shouting orders across battlefields. It should have terrified her. Instead, it wrapped around her like a blanket against the cold that had started seeping into her bones. Alara tried to speak, managed only a sound halfway between a whimper and a plea. His hands, large enough to palm her skull, moved with surprising gentleness as they examined her injury. One palm settled against her lower back, steady and warm through the thin fabric of her servant's dress. The other hovered over the glass embedded in her thigh, not touching, assessing with the efficiency of someone who'd treated battlefield wounds. Deep, the word carried weight. Severed muscle, possibly nicked the artery. His gaze lifted to hers again, and this time she saw something that made no sense. Concern. "How long have you been bleeding?" She should answer. Should explain about Seraphine and the push and the accident that wasn't an accident at all. But her tongue had forgotten how to form words, and her vision kept trying to tunnel down to a pinpoint of light. "Your Majesty?" Corwin Gray's voice cut across the ballroom like a blade through silk. The head steward materialized at the edge of the growing scene, his beta authority vibrating with barely controlled anger. At 42, he'd served the Blackwell family for 20 years, managing servants with ruthless efficiency and punishing infractions with creative cruelty. His iron gray hair was slicked back from a face that had forgotten how to smile. "This is highly irregular. We have healers for servants. I'll have her removed immediately." Theron didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the interruption. His hand remained steady on Alara's back, an anchor against the tide trying to pull her under. "She's lost too much blood for moving." His tone allowed no argument. "And she's not going to the servants' quarters." Silence crashed down like a physical weight. "But Your Majesty," Corwin began, "she's coming to me." 3 words that rewrote reality. Before Alara could process what was happening, before Corwin could protest further, Theron slid one arm beneath her knees and another around her back. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest with care that contradicted every story she'd ever heard about the ruthless king. Pain exploded through her leg as the movement shifted the embedded glass. A sound escaped her throat, small and broken and humiliating. She bit down on her already bleeding lip, tasting copper, refusing to cry out in front of 200 witnesses who would whisper about the weak Omega who couldn't even fall quietly. "Easy." The word rumbled through his chest against her ear, intimate as a secret. "I have you." And somehow impossibly the pain dulled. Not disappeared, not even close. But it retreated to something manageable, as if his nearness acted as a buffer between her and the worst of it. Alara's Omega instincts, suppressed for 12 years under Wolf's bane and brutal training, stirred for the first time since childhood. They whispered things that made no sense. Safe. Protected. His. Theron turned toward the grand staircase that led to the private wings of the castle, carrying her through a crowd that parted like water. Alara caught fragmented glimpses over his shoulder. Seraphine's face beautiful and terrible in its fury. Corwin's expression calculating something dark. 2 beta guards stepping into formation behind them, hands on weapons, ready to follow their king into whatever madness this was. They climbed stairs Alara had only ever scrubbed on her hands and knees, past tapestries she'd dusted while invisible. Entered corridors where nobles walked and servants scurried with eyes down, hoping not to be noticed. Theron's scent wrapped around her stronger with each step. Pine and smoke and something wilder. Mountain storms and winter wind. Her dormant Omega nature recognized something in that scent. Something that called to parts of her she'd learned to bury. The pain in her leg kept time with her heartbeat. Throb. Pulse. Bleed. But his arms remained steady, his stride never faltering, Despite the inky veins she could now see threading up his neck. The death sentence he carried with grace and silence because alphas, especially alpha kings, didn't complain about dying. They reached a wing of the castle Alara had never seen. Doors carved with wolves and crowns, windows overlooking gardens instead of servant yards. Wealth and power breathed from the very stones. Theron shouldered through double doors into chambers that stole what remained of Alara's breath. The Alpha King's personal rooms. A massive bed dominated one wall draped in furs so soft they looked like smoke. A fireplace large enough to stand in crackled with flames that cast dancing shadows across furniture, worth more than her fabricated debt. Shelves lined with leather-bound books. Weapons mounted on walls, a space that spoke of power and loneliness in equal measure. He laid her on his bed. The furs beneath her back felt like lying on clouds. Her bleeding legs stained them immediately crimson, spreading across silver-gray pelts. Panic cut through the haze of shock and pain. "No, I can't. I shouldn't." The words tumbled out, broken and desperate. "The servants' quarters, anywhere but—" "You're exactly where you need to be." His hand on her shoulder stopped her attempt to sit up with gentle pressure. "Moving will make the bleeding worse. They'll say she couldn't finish, couldn't voice the accusations she knew would come. Omega tricks, seduction, manipulation, all the things servants got executed for when they dared rise above their station. Let them say whatever they want." His steel-colored gaze held hers with absolute certainty. "No one will touch you here without answering to me." The door burst open hard enough to crack against the wall. An elderly man entered carrying a leather medical bag, his white hair wild around a face carved by 7 decades of life. He wore sleeping clothes beneath a hastily thrown-on coat, suggesting he'd been roused from bed. But his dark eyes were sharp as a hawk's as they swept the scene and landed on Alara. "Magnus, stay outside," Theron ordered one of the guards who'd followed them. "Aldrich, tell the kitchens I need hot water, clean linens, and whatever medical supplies the healers have for deep wounds. Go." Footsteps retreated. The door closed. The old man set his bag on the bedside table with movements economical from long practice. He looked at Theron with an expression somewhere between exasperation and resignation. "Move aside, boy. Let me see what we're dealing with." Only someone who'd known the king since childhood could call him boy and live. This had to be Master Cedric, the royal physician who'd delivered Theron and Seraphine, both who'd served their father before them, who held a position of such trust that he dined at the high table during feasts. Theron stepped back, though Alara noticed he didn't go far. Just far enough to give the healer room to work. Master Cedric's hands were gentle, despite their age, as they examined her leg. His touch was clinical, professional. Nothing like Corwin's cruelty or the casual violence she'd learned to expect from those with power over her. But even gentle examination hurt. Alara bit the inside of her cheek, tasting fresh blood, fighting to stay silent, as skilled fingers probed around embedded glass. Her vision went white, her hands fisted in fur, so soft it felt like sin. A sound escaped despite her best efforts, animal and ashamed. Broken glass embedded approximately 2 inches into the vastus lateralis muscle. Master Cedric's voice took on the clinical detachment of someone cataloging injuries. "Significant blood loss from what appears to be a nicked femoral artery, though not completely severed or she'd already be dead. The muscle is torn, which will require careful suturing." His hands moved to her arms, pushing up the sleeves of her dress. Alara's shame deepened as he exposed what she'd kept hidden for 12 years. Bruises in various stages of healing, scars from old burns, the distinctive marks that came from being grabbed too hard, pushed into walls, taught through pain to move faster and speak less. The healer's hand stilled on a particularly dark bruise circling her upper arm. Perfect finger marks. 5 days old. And these, Master Cedric's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "How long has this been happening to you, child?" Alara couldn't answer. Speaking would make it real, would make her complicit in her own suffering by admitting she'd endured it for so long without fighting back. Theron's voice cut through her silence like a blade through silk. "How long has my castle harbored someone who beats Omegas near to death?" The raw fury in those words made Alara flinch, but it wasn't directed at her. It was grief and rage twisted together, the sound of a man discovering poison in his own house. Master Cedric opened his medical bag and began preparing instruments. "I need to remove the glass and suture the artery before she bleeds out. This will hurt considerably." "Does she need restraints?" "No." Theron moved back to the bedside. "I'll hold her." Before Alara could protest, his hand found hers. Large fingers threaded through smaller ones, calloused palm against her work-roughened skin. The contact sent electricity up her arm, warm and startling. Squeeze as hard as you need, he said quietly. Break my fingers if it helps. I've had worse. Master Cedric selected a pair of silver forceps from his bag. The metal gleamed in firelight as he positioned them over her wound. On three, the healer said. One. He pulled on two. Pain detonated through Alara's leg like lightning through a tree. White hot and branching, it consumed everything else. Her back arched off the bed. Her hand clamped down on Theron's hard enough to feel bones grind. A scream built in her throat, but she swallowed it down, swallowed it back because Omegas who screamed drew attention and attention meant punishment. But a sound escaped anyway. Pitiful. Broken. The kind of noise wounded animals made in traps. Got it. Master Cedric held up a shard of glass as long as Alara's fingers slick with blood. He dropped it into a basin with a clink and immediately pressed clean cloth against the wound. Now the suturing. This will take time. Try to stay still. Needle and thread came next. Alara felt each pierce of skin, each pull of fiber through torn flesh. The healer worked with the swift efficiency of someone who'd stitched up battlefield injuries, but battlefield soldiers were alphas and betas, trained to endure pain. She was an Omega who'd spent 12 years learning to go numb. Except she couldn't go numb. Not with Theron's hand holding hers, not with his scent wrapping around her like a shield against the worst of it. His presence kept her tethered to consciousness when shock tried to pull her under. Master Cedric worked through the night. He sutured the artery, first tiny careful stitches, invisible except to someone looking for them. Then the muscle layer by careful layer, rebuilding what glass had destroyed. Finally, the skin, neat, precise stitches that would minimize scarring. He wrapped her leg in clean linen, binding it tight enough to stop bleeding, but loose enough not to cut off circulation. Pressed gentle fingers to her abdomen, checking for signs of internal damage. Examined the old bruises with hands that shook slightly, though whether from age or anger, Alara couldn't tell. Through it all, Theron remained. He should have left, should have returned to his gala, his territories, his kingdom that needed ruling. Instead, he sat vigil beside his bed where a broken servant stained his expensive furs with blood and fear. Alara drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time she woke, he was there. Once she felt a cool cloth on her forehead. Another time his voice murmured something she couldn't quite hear. The pain remained, but his presence kept it from drowning her entirely. Dawnlight was creeping through the windows when the fever finally broke. Her mind cleared enough to understand where she was, what had happened, the impossibility of an Alpha King personally caring for a broken Omega servant. Theron leaned forward in his chair, bloodshot eyes searching her face. Master Cedric said you would wake soon. He said you'll survive, though recovery will take time. Alara nodded, unable to find words. Her throat felt raw, though she couldn't remember screaming. His expression shifted into something harder, more dangerous. The ruthless king emerging from beneath the careful gentleness. Now I need you to answer one question, truthfully. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the command in it was absolute. Who did this to you? She hesitated. Speaking the name would unleash something terrible. Corwin had connections, friends among the servants, ways of making life unbearable for those who caused trouble. He would call her a liar, would paint her as a scheming Omega, trying to manipulate the king. But Theron waited with the patience of someone who'd interrogated enemies and extracted confessions from the unwilling. And Alara realized something that should have terrified her, but instead felt like relief. He already knew. He simply needed her to confirm it. Corwin. The name left her lips like poison. Head steward, Corwin Gray. For a long moment, Theron said nothing, didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. Then something woke behind his mercury gaze. Something ancient and lethal. Something that reminded her why conquered territories spoke his name with fear. Thank you. His voice remained soft, conversational. Rest now, you're under my personal protection. No one will harm you again. He stood moving toward the door with predatory grace. Your Majesty. Her voice stopped him at the threshold. What will you do? He looked back at her, and for just a moment she saw past the gentle Alpha who'd carried her to safety. Saw the warrior king who'd ended bloodlines and rewritten borders. I'm going to have a conversation with my head steward. His smile held no warmth, only promise. And when that conversation is finished, you'll never need to fear him again. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. Alara lay in the king's bed, surrounded by furs and firelight, and she understood with terrible certainty that she'd just set something irreversible into motion. By speaking Corwin's name, she'd sealed his fate, and possibly her own. 3 days passed while Alara's body slowly remembered how to heal. Master Cedric visited twice daily, changing bandages and monitoring for signs of infection that never came. His weathered hands were always gentle as they checked sutures and probed for fever. Each visit, he asked questions that had nothing to do with her leg. Do you sleep well here? Has anyone tried to enter without permission? Are you eating enough? The concern in his voice made something in Alara's chest ache. She'd spent 12 years invisible, and now the royal physician treated her injuries like they mattered. A young servant girl named Petra brought meals on silver trays 3 times a day. She couldn't have been more than 16, with wide brown eyes that darted nervously around the king's chambers, like she expected to be punished for witnessing something forbidden. Why am I here? Alara asked on the second day after Petra had set down a breakfast of soft bread, honey, and tea that smelled of mint and chamomile. Luxuries she'd never tasted in the servants' quarters, where meals consisted of whatever the nobles didn't finish. Petra's hands trembled as she arranged the dishes. I don't know, miss, but there are guards outside your door, with orders to let no one pass without royal permission. She leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. The whole castle is talking about it. About you. Alara's stomach clenched. What are they saying? That the king carried you from the gala covered in blood? That he threatened Corwin when the steward tried to take you away? That Seraphine has been in a fury for 3 days, throwing things and screaming at servants? Petra's eyes went wider. They say Corwin hasn't been seen since that night. The door opened before Alara could respond. Petra jumped, nearly knocking over the teapot in her haste to curtsy as Theron entered. He looked different in daylight, less like the untouchable king from the ballroom, and more like a man who carried too much weight on shoulders broad enough to bear it. He wore simple clothes, dark pants, and a white shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and the shadowed veins that threaded beneath his skin. The corruption had spread since that night. Alara could see it now, inky lines creeping up his neck toward his jaw. He moved carefully, like each step required conscious thought, though he tried to hide it. Leave us, he said to Petra. Not unkindly, but with the absolute authority of someone accustomed to instant obedience. The girl fled, closing the door with a soft click. Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of fire in the hearth. Theron crossed to the window, looking out over grounds Alara had never seen from this height. Gardens stretched in geometric precision, below autumn flowers blooming in shades of gold and crimson. Beyond them, the forest rose dark and wild against mountains that touched the sky. How's the leg? He asked without turning. Better. Master Cedric says I should be able to walk in another week. Good. He was quiet for a moment, hands clasped behind his back. I owe you an apology. That startled her. Kings didn't apologize, especially not to servants. For what? For not knowing. He turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes had nothing to do with the toxin. That this was happening, that you suffered while I remained ignorant in my own house. You didn't know because we were meant to be invisible. The words came easier now, perhaps because he'd shown her gentleness when cruelty would have been simpler. Omegas learn early that speaking brings punishment. Silence keeps us alive. No more, bah. His voice carried the weight of a vow. The silence ends today. You will be heard. And the ones who profited from that silence will learn that some debts can only be paid in ruin. Before Alara could ask what he meant, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy, multiple sets, the kind of purposeful stride that preceded important news. Theron opened the door to reveal 2 men in the black and silver uniforms of the Royal Guard. Both were betas, both carried themselves with the dangerous competence of soldiers who'd survived actual combat. The taller one had a face marked by a scar that ran from temple to jaw, pulling the left side of his mouth into a permanent half-scowl. This had to be Magnus the guard who'd followed Theron from the ballroom. The other was younger, maybe 30, with sharp green eyes and the lean build of someone who relied on speed rather than strength. Aldrich, Alara guessed, the one who'd fetched medical supplies. Both men's expressions were grim. Your Majesty, Magnus said, his voice rough as gravel. We've completed the investigation as ordered. Theron's jaw tightened. Come in. Close the door. They entered, and Magnus carried a leather folder thick with documents. He glanced at Alara, questions clear in his scarred face, but said nothing. Whatever his king commanded, he would follow. Report, Theron ordered. Magnus opened the folder, spreading papers across the fur coverlet near Alara's uninjured leg. She could see handwritten testimonies, ledgers with numbers in neat columns, documents marked with official seals. We spent 3 days questioning servants, examining records, following whispers that everyone heard, but no one dared speak aloud. Magnus's voice carried barely controlled fury. We found 6 other women. The words hit like a fist to Alara's healing ribs. Aldrich stepped forward, taking over the explanation. 6 Omega servants who worked in this castle over the past 4 years. All suffered under Corwin's authority. All were threatened into silence. He opened the folder further, laying out pages of testimony in shaking handwriting. Names Alara recognized from the kitchens, the laundries, the invisible corners where Omegas labored, and prayed no one noticed them. Elena Thorne, 19 years old. Aldrich's finger traced the first document, thrown down the East Tower stairs 2 years ago. When she tried to report it, Corwin threatened to have her younger sister dismissed and blacklisted from work in all 3 territories. She stayed silent. Magnus picked up the next testimony. Sarah Winters, 21, beaten badly enough she couldn't walk for a week, locked in the cold storage until she promised never to speak of it. One by one they read the names. Mira, Cassandra, Joelle, Thea. 7 of them total, including Alara. 7 Omega women. Corwin had brutalized while the castle went about its business, while nobles feasted in the Great Hall, while the king conquered territories and never knew such evil festered in his own household. Alara's hands shook as she read their words, their pain, written in careful letters, finally given voice after years of enforced silence. Some of the incidents were recent. Others stretched back to before she'd even arrived at the castle. A systematic pattern of cruelty that Corwin had perfected over years. But this is not the worst of it. Aldrich's voice dropped lower and fury burned in his green eyes. Corwin was not acting alone. Magnus produced another set of documents, financial ledgers with entries in cramped handwriting. We found these hidden in Corwin's private chambers, payment records going back 3 years. Alara didn't understand at first. Then she saw the dates, the amounts, the names attached to each transaction. Lord Edmund Blackwood, Lord Victor Heron, Lady Morgana Ashford. Her stomach turned to ice. They were paying him. Aldrich's words came clipped, precise, each one landing like a blade. Noble members of the Royal Council were paying Corwin Gray for private access to Omega servants. Gold in exchange for an hour, sometimes a night, with vulnerable women who had no power to refuse. The room spun. Alara gripped the furs beneath her hands, trying to anchor herself against nausea that had nothing to do with her injury. She'd thought she knew cruelty, thought Corwin throwing her downstairs was the depths of what evil looked like. She'd been wrong. This was systematic, profitable, protected by the very people who made laws and dispensed justice. 14 transactions over 3 years. Magnus's finger traced entries in the ledger, and his voice cracked slightly on the next words. Sometimes the same Omega multiple times. Corwin would arrange the meeting, ensure privacy, and afterward guarantee silence through whatever means necessary. Threats, violence. In one case, he stopped visibly struggling. In one case, he told an Omega her family would suffer accidents if she spoke. Theron stood absolutely motionless by the window, his back to the room. But Alara could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid control keeping rage contained. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft as falling snow and twice as cold. Names, I want every name involved. Magnus pulled out a separate sheet. Lord Edmund Blackwood paid for access 6 times. 3 different Omegas. The last payment was 2 months ago. Lord Victor Heron 3 times, all with the same woman. Aldrich's jaw clenched. Sarah Winters, the one who couldn't walk for a week afterward. And Lady Morgana Ashford twice. Theron turned from the window. The man who'd shown Alara gentleness was gone. In his place stood the conqueror who'd ended bloodlines through strategic brilliance and absolute ruthlessness. Summon the Royal Council, every member, no exceptions. We convene at sunset. Your Majesty, the protocol for emergency sessions requires 3 days' notice. Aldrich's protest was gentle but firm. And if you move against council members without careful planning. I don't care about protocol. Theron's voice cracked like a whip. I care that members of my council have been paying my head steward to facilitate the assault of Omega servants under my own roof. That ends today. He moved toward the bed, his expression softening slightly as he looked at Alara. I'm sorry you had to hear this. Sorry that what happened to you was part of something so much worse. I'm not the first. The words scraped from her throat. That's what you're saying. I was just another transaction. No. He crouched beside the bed, bringing himself to eye level with her. You were the first who survived long enough to reach someone who actually gave a damn, and that's about to change everything. Magnus cleared his throat. Your Majesty, if I may speak freely, always. This will cause upheaval. Lord Blackwood commands the largest military force outside your personal guard. Lady Ashford controls the eastern trade routes. If you move against them, you risk fracturing the alliance that's kept these territories stable. Then let it fracture. Theron stood, and Alara heard the battlefield commander in his tone. I built this kingdom on strength and strategy. But what good is strength if I only use it to protect those who already have power? What good is strategy if it means ignoring the suffering of those too afraid to speak? Aldrich and Magnus exchanged glances. Something passed between them, some silent communication born of years fighting beside their king. We stand with you, Magnus said quietly. Whatever comes. Good. Then prepare everything. Theron's voice shifted into the tone of a king issuing battle orders. Every testimony, every ledger entry, every piece of evidence. I want it organized and unassailable. When the council convenes, they will see exactly what has been happening, and then they will answer for it. The guards bowed and departed, leaving Alara alone with Theron once more. He crossed to the chair by the hearth, sinking into it with a weariness that aged him beyond his 25 years. The poisoned veins stood out starkly against his neck in the firelight. His hands trembled slightly before he clasped them together, hiding the weakness. You should rest, Alara said softly. The toxin is always there. He cut her off, but not unkindly. I've learned to function through it. Some days are worse than others. Is today worse? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Today I discovered my castle has been harboring systematic abuse for years while I was too blind to see it. Yes, today is worse. Silence settled between them. Outside the windows, afternoon sun painted the mountains in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere in the castle below, servants prepared for an evening that would change everything. Why are you doing this? Alara asked finally. You could have had me treated and sent back to the servants' quarters. Could have dealt with Corwin quietly. Instead, you're calling an emergency council session that might fracture your kingdom. Why? Theron looked at her, and she saw layers beneath the surface. Pain from the corruption eating him. Fury at the betrayal. But underneath it all, something that looked almost like hope. 3 days ago, you crawled into my war room bleeding and broken, and I caught your scent for the first time. His voice was rough. Do you know what happened? Alara shook her head. For 7 years, I've lived with this toxin eating me from the inside. Every breath hurts. Every heartbeat is a reminder that I'm dying. The healers gave me compounds for the pain, but they barely touched it. I learned to function through agony because alphas don't have the luxury of weakness. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Then you collapsed at my feet, smelling like rain after wildfire and burning cedar. And for the first time in 7 years, the pain stopped. Alara's breath caught. Stopped. Not completely, but enough that I could breathe without feeling like my chest was filled with broken glass. Enough that my hands stopped shaking. Enough that I remembered what it felt like to exist without constant agony. His gaze held hers. You are the only thing in 7 years that's made this bearable. Understanding crashed over her like cold water. The mate bond, the thing Omega fairy tales spoke about but she'd never believed was real. The mystical connection between Alpha and Omega that made them two halves of one whole. I'm your mate, she whispered. I think so. My wolf certainly believes it. He's been howling inside my head for 3 days, demanding I keep you close, protect you, never let you out of my sight. Theron's smile was self-deprecating. I've been trying to be rational about this, trying not to let a biological imperative dictate my actions. But the truth is, even if you weren't my mate, I'd still be doing this. Why, Bohanam? Because it's right. He said it simply like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Because those women deserve justice. Because you deserve to heal without fear. Because I'd rather lose my kingdom trying to protect the vulnerable than keep it by enabling their abuse. Footsteps in the corridor announced Petra's return. She knocked softly before entering with fresh bandages and a basin of warm water. Theron stood wincing slightly as the movement pulled at something painful inside. I need to prepare for the council session. Magnus will remain outside your door. If you need anything, tell him. He moved toward the door, but Alara's voice stopped him. Your Majesty. He turned back. Thank you, she said quietly, for believing me, for caring when no one else did. Something shifted in his expression, softened. My name is Theron. When we're alone, I'd prefer you use it. Then he was gone, leaving Alara with questions multiplying like winter stars. The afternoon passed slowly. Petra cleaned and rebandaged Alara's leg with gentle efficiency. Master Cedric came for his evening visit, pronounced her healing well, and left medicines for pain and infection. As sunset painted the sky in shades of blood and gold, Alara found herself thinking about the council session happening somewhere below. About Theron facing down powerful nobles who'd profited from suffering. About the 7 other women whose names were written in shaking script finally being heard. She thought about Corwin disappeared for 3 days now. About what conversations Theron might have had with the man who'd made her life a careful study in enduring cruelty. And she thought about the impossible thing Theron had revealed, that her scent the Omega nature she'd suppressed for 12 years with Wolfsbane, and fear somehow eased the corruption, killing him. Mate bond or not, she was tied to him now, her fate bound to his in ways that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Night fell, the castle quieted, and somewhere in the great hall justice began to unfold. Magnus came for Alara an hour before sunset. She'd been dozing when his knock startled her awake. The scarred guard entered at her acknowledgement, his expression carefully neutral. "The king requested your presence at the council session," he said without preamble. "You're not required to attend, but he thought you should have the choice to witness what happens next." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. "I can barely walk." "I'll carry you if needed. We have a hidden gallery overlooking the council chamber. You can watch without being seen." Magnus's scarred face softened slightly. "What's about to happen? It's happening because of your courage. The king thought you deserved to see it through. She should stay here, should let justice unfold without forcing herself to relive the trauma. The safe choice would be to remain in these chambers where pain medicine and soft furs kept reality at a manageable distance. But Alara had spent 12 years being safe through silence, through invisibility, through swallowing her voice until she forgot it existed. "Help me up," she said. Magnus assisted her from the bed with surprising gentleness for a man built like a war machine. Her injured leg protested a deep ache that the medicine couldn't fully mask, but it held her weight when she tested it. The sutures pulled, but didn't tear. He produced a simple cloak from somewhere dark gray wool that would help her blend into shadows, wrapped it around her shoulders and fastened the clasp at her throat with hands that had probably fastened armor on hundreds of soldiers. "There are stairs," he warned. "I can carry you. I'll manage." Pride, stupid and stubborn, made her want to walk on her own power, to face this reckoning upright. They left through a side door she hadn't noticed, entering a narrow corridor built into the castle walls. Servants' passages designed for invisible people to move unseen. Magnus had to duck beneath low archways, but he navigated the dim space with the confidence of someone who'd memorized every hidden route. They climbed stairs that spiraled upward, each step sending fresh pain through Alara's leg. She bit her lip and kept climbing. Magnus stayed close enough to catch her if she fell, but far enough back to preserve her dignity. The passage opened into a small gallery overlooking the council chamber. Carved wooden screens allowed them to see without being seen, positioned high enough that anyone below would have to crane their neck at an uncomfortable angle to notice the space. Alara sank onto the bench Magnus indicated, grateful to take weight off her leg. He settled beside her, a solid presence in the shadows. Below the council chamber filled with nobles in silk and velvet. The room was circular, built for the round table that dominated its center. 30 chairs surrounded that table, each carved with the sigil of the house it represented. Tapestries hung on stone walls depicting battles won and alliances forged. Candelabras burned with enough flames to make the space bright as daylight. The nobles arrived in clusters, speculation clear in their raised voices and animated gestures. Lord Edmund Blackwood entered like he owned the place, a mountain of a man with silver threading through his dark beard. His house commanded the largest private army outside the royal guard, and he carried that power in every stride. Lord Victor Heron came next, younger and handsome in the way poisonous things often were. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he greeted other council members, working the room with practiced charm. Lady Morgana Ashford swept in wearing emerald silk and enough diamonds to buy a small village. Beautiful and deadly, she'd married into the Ashford name 25 years ago and consolidated control of the eastern trade routes through strategic brilliance and ruthless elimination of competition. Seraphine's mother. Theron's stepmother, technically, though she'd never treated him as anything but an obstacle to her daughter's ambitions. Alara watched them take their seats. These people who'd paid gold to hurt women like her. They looked so normal, so respectable. Lord Blackwood laughed at something another noble said. Lord Heron accepted wine from a servant with an easy smile. Lady Ashford arranged her skirts with the casual grace of someone accustomed to luxury. Monsters should look like monsters. Instead, they looked like people you'd bow to in corridors and serve at dinner without ever knowing what darkness they carried. The great doors opened. Theron entered, flanked by Aldrich and another guard. He wore full royal regalia, tonight black coat embroidered with silver wolves, the crown of twisted metal that marked him as king, a cloak bearing the territorial sigil. Not the gentle man who'd sat beside her bed. This was the conqueror who'd ended bloodlines. The chamber fell silent. Theron took his place at the head of the table but didn't sit, simply stood there until even the whispers died, his presence commanding attention through sheer force of will. Thank you for coming in such short notice. His voice carried through the chamber with absolute authority. I've called this emergency session because I've discovered something that cannot wait for protocol or procedure. Aldrich moved forward, placing leather folders on the table. He began distributing documents to each council member with mechanical precision. Lord Blackwood's voice boomed across the chamber. What is this financial records testimonies? What matter requires such drama, Your Majesty? Theron waited until every noble held papers before responding. The matter of systematic abuse occurring within these castle walls. For years under my own roof, Omega servants have been brutalized. And worse, that brutality has been facilitated and profited from by members of this very council. The chamber erupted. Preposterous! Lady Ashford rose, her beautiful face flushed with outrage. You summon us here to discuss servant discipline. This is beneath the dignity of... Sit down. Two words quietly spoken but carrying such alpha command that Lady Ashford sank back into her chair as if struck. Theron waited for silence to return. Read the documents before you. Read the testimonies of 7 Omega women. Read the financial ledgers showing payments made to head steward Corwin Gray. Then tell me this is beneath our dignity. Alara watched nobles flip through pages. Some expressions showed genuine horror. Others revealed carefully controlled fury. And a few Lord Blackwood, Lord Heron, Lady Ashford, their faces betrayed guilt in the tightness around their eyes, the way they gripped parchment too hard. This is fabricated. Lord Heron threw his documents onto the table with theatrical disgust. The word of Omega servants against respected nobles. Any court would dismiss this as slander designed to, which is precisely why the abuse continued unchecked. Aldrich's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Because men like you knew no one would believe victims whose only crime was being born Omega. Lord Blackwood stood, his massive frame intimidating. Even if these accusations were true, and I am not conceding they are, what business is it of the crown how nobles conduct their private affairs? What we do, they are not in your employment. Theron's voice went cold as mountain ice. They are castle servants under my protection. And what was done to them was not private affairs. It was assault. Systematic, profitable, protected assault. He moved around the table with predatory grace, stopping directly in front of Lord Blackwood. You paid Corwin 6 times, 3 different women. The last payment was 2 months ago. Blackwood's face went purple. You dare accuse me? I have served this kingdom for 30 years. My armies secured your southern borders. I will not stand here and be interrogated like a common criminal by a king who... By a king who what? Theron's smile was sharp as broken glass. Finish that sentence, Edmund. Tell me what you really think. The chamber held its breath. Blackwood's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he said nothing. Theron turned to address the full council. I am stripping Corwin Gray of his position effective immediately. He will face judgment for his crimes, and those who paid him will surrender lands equal in value to compensate his victims. The explosion of protest was deafening. Nobles shot to their feet, voices raised in fury and disbelief. The careful order of the council chamber dissolved into chaos. This is madness. Lady Ashford's voice cut through the din. You cannot redistribute noble lands to servants. The precedent alone would destabilize the entire... The precedent that nobles can purchase access to vulnerable Omegas. Theron's voice cracked like a whip. That precedent needs destroying. An older lord rose, his tone conciliatory. Your Majesty, please. We understand your anger, perhaps monetary compensation, a formal apology, reforms to prevent future incidents. But seizing lands, they will surrender their lands. Theron's tone allowed no negotiation. The victims will receive property security and the means to build lives free from fear. That is justice. It's political suicide, Lord Heron said flatly. Half this council will withdraw support. Our armies will return to our territories. You'll spark civil war over Omega servants. The chamber went absolutely still. Theron stood before them, this king who'd conquered territories through strategic brilliance and careful alliances, who understood politics and power and the delicate balance required to rule, and he was throwing it all aside. Then so be it. Alara's breath caught. From her hidden gallery, she watched 30 nobles process what their king had just said. I have built this kingdom on strength. Theron's voice carried to every corner of the chamber. on conquest and alliances and calculated decisions. But what is the point of strength if I use it to protect only those who already have power? What is the point of justice if it applies only to those noble enough to deserve it? He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. You think I fear civil war? I've fought 7 wars and won them all. You think I fear losing your armies? I conquered half this realm with 1/3 of the forces you command. You think I fear the political consequences of choosing mercy over tradition? His voice dropped to something more dangerous. I fear nothing except becoming the kind of ruler who lets innocent people suffer because it's convenient, because it's profitable, because it's traditional. This is insanity. Lord Blackwood's voice shook with rage. Omegas are servants. They have no right to property, no right to demand justice from their betters. This is the natural order of things. The way it has always been, the natural order. Theron's laugh held no humor. The natural order that allows the strong to brutalize the weak, the natural order that makes cruelty profitable. That natural order ends today, in my kingdom, under my rule. Lady Ashford stood with lethal grace. Then you rule alone, Your Majesty. House Ashford withdraws its support. We will return to our territories and wait for a wiser king to take the throne. Several other nobles rose with her. Not all, but enough. The threat was clear. Abandon this madness or face fragmentation. Theron watched them with that terrible stillness. Then he spoke 5 words that would echo through history. This ends now by my decree. Power rolled off him in waves. Not just alpha dominance, but something more fundamental. The absolute authority of a king who decided that mercy mattered more than politics, that justice was worth any price. Those who wish to leave may do so. His voice carried finality. Take your armies, return to your territories. But know this, any noble who profits from the abuse of Omegas, any lord who treats the vulnerable as property, any house that stands against this decree will find themselves facing the full weight of the crown. Not in negotiation, not in compromise, in war. He straightened to his full height, and Alara saw what made him a king. I am Theron Blackwell, Alpha King of these territories. I have ended bloodlines and rewritten borders, and I will burn every corrupt house to ashes before I allow this evil to continue. The chamber held its breath. Then slowly an older lord stood, Lord Cornelius Ashton, whose daughter was an Omega, though he'd kept it secret for years. Your Majesty is right. This must end. House Ashton supports your decree. Another noble rose. Then another. Not all, but enough. Lord Blackwood stared at Theron with pure hatred. You will regret this. No. Theron's smile held no warmth. You will. Aldrich, take Lord Blackwood, Lord Heron, and Lady Ashford into custody. They will remain as guests of the crown until their land transfers are complete. This is unlawful imprisonment. Lady Ashford's composure finally cracked. This is justice. Theron turned his back on them, the ultimate dismissal. And it is long overdue. Guards moved forward. Lord Blackwood tried to resist his alpha dominance rolling out in waves, but Aldrich countered with his own beta authority, backed by royal decree. Lady Ashford maintained her dignity as they escorted her from the chamber, but her eyes promised vengeance. Lord Heron went quietly, his handsome face pale as death. The remaining nobles sat in stunned silence as the great doors closed behind the accused. Theron addressed those who remained. Let this stand as precedent. Anyone who harms those under my protection, anyone who treats vulnerability as invitation for cruelty, will face the same choice. Restitution and exile or execution and eternal shame. He looked at each noble in turn. The old order is dead. What rises in its place will be built on justice, not tradition, on protection, not exploitation, and anyone who cannot accept that has no place in my kingdom. From her hidden gallery, Alara watched nobles absorb the new reality. Some looked relieved, others frightened. A few seemed to be calculating whether loyalty or rebellion served their interests better. But they all understood that something fundamental had shifted, that their king had chosen Omegas over political stability, that mercy had proven stronger than tradition. Theron dismissed the council. As nobles filed out in clusters, their whispered conversations created a wall of sound that echoed off stone walls. When the chamber finally emptied, Theron remained standing at the head of the table, alone. The weight of what he'd just done settling onto shoulders already burdened by the corruption eating him and the demands of ruling. Alara watched from above this man who'd rewritten his kingdom for her, for 7 women who'd learned to survive through silence. And she understood with crystalline clarity that he'd meant every word. He would burn it all down before allowing the abuse to continue. Magnus touched her shoulder gently. We should go. You need rest. But Alara couldn't look away from the figure below. Theron's hands braced on the table, his head bowed, poisoned veins visible even from this distance. He'd spent what strength the toxin left him on defending her, on rewriting laws and threatening civil war. Why, she whispered. Why would he risk everything? Magnus followed her gaze. Because he's a better man than his father was. Because someone has to stand for those who can't stand for themselves. The scarred guard's voice softened. And because from the moment he caught your scent, you became his reason to fight instead of surrendering. Below, Theron finally straightened, turned toward the doors, and for just a moment he looked up at the gallery where Alara watched from shadows. Their eyes met across the distance. He couldn't possibly see her behind the carved screens, but somehow he knew she was there. Knew she'd witnessed him choose justice over every political calculation that should have mattered more. Then he was gone, leaving the chamber empty, except for dying candles and the lingering echo of noble fury. Magnus helped Alara navigate the hidden passages back. Each step sent fresh pain through her healing leg, but she barely noticed. Her mind replayed the council session, the rage on Lord Blackwood's face, the fear in Lady Ashford's eyes. The moment when Theron had declared he'd rather lose his kingdom than allow suffering to continue. They reached the chambers to find Master Cedric waiting with Petra. The old healer took one look at Alara's pale face and the way she favored her injured leg and made a sound of disapproval. Too much strain too soon. Bed, now. Alara obeyed, sinking into furs that smelled like safety. Master Cedric examined her leg, pronounced the sutures intact, but the surrounding tissue inflamed and prepared a stronger dose of pain medicine. Drink this and sleep, he ordered, pressing a cup into her hands. Tomorrow will bring enough trouble without you exhausting yourself tonight. The medicine was bitter but effective. Within minutes, the edges of reality softened. Petra banked the fire and left fresh water on the bedside table. Magnus took up position outside the door. Alara drifted towards sleep with images from the council session floating behind her closed eyes. But one moment stood out clearer than the rest. Theron declaring war on tradition itself. For her. For 7 women whose names were finally written in documents that mattered. For every Omega who'd learned that silence was survival. The reckoning had come, and Alara slept surrounded by furs and firelight, dreaming of a world where speaking didn't mean dying. Where Omegas owned land and built futures. Where broken kings and shattered servants saved each other. The dream felt dangerously close to hope. Morning came with the weight of judgment. Alara woke to find Petra laying out clothes across the foot of the bed. Not servant gray, but a dress of deep midnight blue, simple in cut, but made from fabric that whispered wealth with every movement. The kind of dress a lady's companion might wear. The kind that said, you matter without shouting it. His Majesty sent these, Petra said softly, her young face serious. He said you're to attend the trial if you're strong enough, but Master Cedric must approve first. The trial, Corwin's reckoning. As if summoned by the thought, the old healer appeared in the doorway, his weathered face drawn with exhaustion. He'd been up all night, Alara realized, preparing for what came next. Let me see that leg, he commanded, and his examination was thorough but swift, the sutures held clean. The inflammation had reduced. Her body was remembering how to heal even if her mind still carried scars that no needle could mend. You can walk, he pronounced finally, but no stairs without assistance. And if the pain becomes too much, you leave immediately. Understood? Alara nodded, though they both knew she wouldn't leave. Couldn't leave. Not when 6 other women were about to stand before the kingdom and speak truths that had festered in silence for years. Petra had helped her dress with gentle efficiency, careful of the bandaged leg. The midnight blue fabric fell in soft folds, concealing the injury while allowing her to move. Someone Theron, she suspected, had thought of everything. Magnus arrived as she finished, his scarred face unreadable. The Great Hall, he said simply, offering his arm. They walked through corridors that hummed with tension. Servants whispered in corners, their eyes following Alara with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something that might have been hope. Word had spread. The Omega who'd bled on marble. The king who'd knelt in her blood. The reckoning that followed. The Great Hall stood at the castle's heart, larger even than the council chamber. Built to hold 500 witnesses today, it groaned with twice that number. Nobles in their finery. Servants in their best clothes. Guards lining the walls. Everyone who could claim a reason to be here had come to witness history. Magnus guided Alara to a seat near the front, close enough to see, but positioned among minor nobles rather than servants. Another message. Another declaration of her changed status. The hall fell silent as great doors opened. Theron entered first, still wearing his crown, still radiating the authority that had cowed his council. But behind him came something unexpected. 6 women walked in formation, flanked by guards who treated them like dignitaries rather than servants. Alara recognized them from their written testimonies. Elena, 19, with dark hair braided tight. Sarah, 21, moving with careful steps that spoke of old injuries. Mira, Cassandra, Joelle, Thea, the survivors. They took seats opposite Alara, their faces showing fear and determination in equal measure. Then Corwin entered in chains. The head steward, who'd ruled the servants with cruelty disguised as efficiency, looked diminished now. His iron-gray hair was disheveled, his fine clothes replaced with prisoner's garb. But his eyes still held calculation, still searched for escape routes that didn't exist. 2 guards forced him to his knees before the throne where Theron sat in judgment. Corwin Gray, Theron's voice carried to every corner of the massive hall. You stand accused of systematic abuse, assault, and conspiracy to profit from the suffering of those under your authority. How do you answer these charges? Corwin's jaw worked. Your Majesty, I have served House Blackwell for 20 years with loyalty. And how do you answer the charges? Silence stretched thin as wire. Not guilty, Corwin finally spat. These are lies told by disgruntled servants seeking to profit from your temporary madness over one of their kind. Theron's expression didn't change. Then let us examine the evidence. Magnus. The scarred guard stepped forward, carrying the now familiar leather folder. But instead of testimonies, he produced something else. A ledger bound in worn leather, its pages filled with Corwin's own handwriting. We found this hidden beneath the floorboards in your private chambers, Magnus said, opening it for all to see. 14 transactions recorded in your hand. Dates, amounts, names of both payers and victims. Your own accounting of crimes you thought would never face judgment. He began to read, each entry a condemnation in Corwin's own script. October 12th, Lord Blackwood, 6 gold crowns, Sarah Winters, West Tower Room. January 3rd, Lord Heron, 4 gold crowns, Sarah Winters, Wine Cellar Storage. March 27th, Lady Ashford, 5 gold crowns, Mira Ashton, East Wing Guest Chambers. The litany continued while Corwin's face drained of color. His own words, his own hand, undeniable. Still claim these charges are fabricated. Theron's question was soft, deadly. Corwin's mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish drowning in air. He looked around the hall, searching for allies, found none. I was following orders. Lady Ashford demanded access to servants for her guests. Lord Blackwood required. You required gold, Aldrich cut in, his voice sharp, and you terrorized vulnerable women to get it. Theron raised a hand for silence. Before I pass sentence, the victims will speak. Each woman you harmed will stand before this hall and tell her story. You will listen to every word. He gestured to the 6 women. Who wishes to speak first? Sarah Winters stood, 21 years old but carrying the weight of much more. She walked to the center of the hall with steps that trembled but didn't falter. My name is Sarah Winters. She began, her voice barely above a whisper, then louder. And I was 20 when Corwin Gray sold me to Lord Heron for the first time. The hall held its breath. He told me Lord Heron was a noble guest who required special service, that attending to his needs was part of my duties. I didn't understand until Corwin locked me in the wine cellar storage room and Lord Heron arrived. Her hands clenched at her sides. When I tried to scream, Corwin said he'd have my younger brother dismissed from the stables and blacklisted. My brother was 15. We had no other family. I stayed silent. Tears streaked her face, but her voice never wavered. 3 times. 3 times Corwin took gold and I paid the price. The 3rd time I fought back. Lord Heron beat me badly enough I couldn't walk for a week. Corwin locked me in cold storage until I promised never to speak of it. She turned to look directly at Corwin. I promised. But you took my voice through fear, not truth. And now I take it back. Sarah returned to her seat through absolute silence. Then Elena stood. I'm Elena Thorne, 19 years old. 2 years ago, Corwin threw me down the East Tower stairs because I refused to arrange a meeting between my younger sister and Lord Blackwood. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. I broke 3 ribs and my left arm. Corwin told me if I reported it, he'd have my sister sold to rogues. She was 16. I stayed silent. One by one, they spoke. Mira told of being locked in the cold storage for 12 hours as punishment for crying after an assault. Cassandra described threats against her elderly mother. Joelle recounted being dragged across the kitchen by her hair when she moved too slowly. Thea, only 17, spoke in a voice that shook but didn't break about cruelties that had stolen her childhood. Each testimony hammered another nail into Corwin's coffin of justifications. When they finished, the great hall sat in stunned silence. 1,000 witnesses who'd never known, or perhaps never wanted to know, what happened in the castle's shadows. Theron stood. Corwin Gray, you have heard the testimonies. You have seen your own ledger. Do you deny these crimes? Corwin knelt in his chains and something in him finally broke. Tears streamed down his face, not from remorse, Alara realized, but from the destruction of his carefully constructed life. I kept order, he whispered. The nobles demanded. I provided. That's how the world works. The strong take what they want, and the weak deserve protection. Theron's voice cut through the hall like a blade. Not exploitation. He gestured to Aldrich, who produced 7 parchments sealed with red wax. Property deeds. You will sign over every asset you possess, your lands in the eastern valleys, your house in the merchant quarter, your savings accumulated over 20 years of service. Theron's tone allowed no negotiation. All of it will be divided equally among your 7 victims. That's everything, Corwin gasped. I'll have nothing. You'll have your life, which is more mercy than you showed any woman under your power. Theron's eyes were cold as winter steel. Sign the documents or face execution at dawn. Choose now. Corwin's hands shook as he reached for the quill Aldrich offered. One by one, he signed away his property, his wealth, his future. Each signature a confession, each deed a small measure of justice. When the last document was signed, Theron addressed the hall. Corwin Gray is stripped of his position and exiled from these territories effective immediately. If he returns, the exile becomes execution. If I hear reports of him harming Omegas in any land, I will personally hunt him down. He nodded to the guards. Escort him to the border. Give him a horse, 3 days' supplies, and nothing else. They hauled Corwin to his feet. As guards led him toward the doors, he looked back once at the 7 women who destroyed him with truth. You'll regret this, he hissed at them. All of you. The world doesn't change because one foolish king. Move, Magnus growled, and Corwin disappeared through the doors into permanent exile. Theron wasn't finished. He gestured to the 7 women. Come forward. They approached the throne together, uncertainty clear in their faces. This wasn't how justice usually worked. Victims didn't stand at the center of great halls while kingdoms watched. Aldrich brought forward a wooden box ornately carved. From it, Theron withdrew 7 property deeds, each bound with ribbon and sealed with his personal sigil. Elena Thorne, he called first. The dark-haired girl stepped forward, trembling. You spoke of your sister, of trying to protect her from harm. Theron placed a deed in her hands. Corwin's Eastern Valley property is now yours. 50 acres of good farmland, a house, a stable. The income from its crops will support you both for life. Elena stared at the parchment like it might disappear. I own this. You own it. No rent, no tribute, no contract binding you to anyone. His voice softened. Your sister is also released from service and granted a stipend until she comes of age. Elena clutched the deed to her chest and wept. Sarah Winters. Sarah approached with her careful, damaged walk. You endured 3 assaults. No compensation can undo that harm. Theron's voice carried both fury and sorrow. But Lord Heron's summer estate is now yours. The vineyard produces enough wine to sell for substantial profit. You need never work again unless you choose to. He placed the deed in her shaking hands. I am sorry this happened in my kingdom under my watch. You deserved protection. You received cruelty instead. That shames me. Sarah looked up at him. This king who'd proven mercy could be stronger than tradition. Thank you, she whispered, for believing us. One by one he called them forward. Mira received fertile farmland. Cassandra got a mill with water rights. Joelle inherited sheep pastures. Thea, youngest at 17, was given 3 shops in the merchant quarter that paid monthly rent. And finally, Theron looked at Alara. Come forward. Her injured leg protested as she rose, but she made it to the throne without assistance. Pride and stubbornness in equal measure. Theron descended the steps to stand before her, holding the final deed. This belonged to Corwin's family for 4 generations. 40 acres south of here. Orchards producing apples and pears. A cottage. Peaceful. Safe. He placed it in her hands and his fingers lingered on hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. You crawled through my castle, bleeding and broken, and you survived long enough to reach someone who cared. This property is what you earned by refusing to disappear. The mate bond hummed between them where their skin touched. Warm. Electric. Undeniable. Thank you, Alara managed, throat tight with emotions too large for words. Theron addressed the hall one final time. Let this stand as the new law. All Omega servants in my territories have the right to own property, to refuse unwanted commands, to report abuse without fear of retaliation. Any noble who violates these rights will face the same choice I offered Corwin: restitution or execution. He looked at the assembled nobles. The old order is dead. What rises in its place will be built on justice. The hall erupted in a mixture of cheers and protests. But Alara noticed something crucial. The cheers outnumbered the protests. Not by much, but enough. Change was coming. Slow, painful, inevitable. As the crowd dispersed, Alara found herself surrounded by the other 6 women. Elena hugged her, carefully mindful of injuries. Sarah smiled, the first real smile Alara had seen on her damaged face. "We did it," Mira whispered, clutching her deed. "We actually did it." "No," Alara corrected gently. "We survived. The king did the rest." "Because you reached him," Cassandra said. "Because you spoke when speaking was death." They stood together in the great hall, 7 women holding parchments that proved they mattered, that their suffering had been acknowledged. That justice, however imperfect, was real. And from across the hall, Theron watched them with something that looked like hope. 3 weeks passed in a blur of healing and revelation. Alara's leg mended enough for her to walk without pain. Master Cedric pronounced her recovery remarkable, though his eyes held questions he didn't voice. The sutures had healed faster than they should, cleaner than normal. "It's the mate bond," Theron told her one evening as they sat in his chambers. "Your proximity helps my condition, but apparently it also accelerates your healing." He'd been visiting every night, always proper, always leaving before midnight. They talked about everything and nothing: his childhood under a cruel father, her mother who taught her to read in secret, the weight of crowns and the freedom of invisibility. And every night the bond between them grew stronger. Alara had moved to her new property a week ago, the cottage in the southern orchards. But Theron visited daily, riding through autumn landscapes painted in gold and crimson. Sometimes they walked between apple trees heavy with fruit. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence. Tonight they stood on the cottage roof, watching the moon rise full and silver over distant mountains. "I'm dying," Theron said, suddenly breaking the peaceful quiet. 3 months, Master Cedric says. Maybe less. The toxin is spreading faster now." Alara's hand found his, threading their fingers together. The now familiar spark of connection jumped between them. "Your touch helps," he continued, his voice rough. "Every time we're close, the pain eases. But it's not enough. Nothing is enough to stop this." "Then we find another way." Alara squeezed his hand. "There has to be something. Some cure the healers haven't discovered." "I've searched for 7 years," bitter laugh. "Every healer in 3 territories. Ancient texts, legends. Nothing works on shadow poison." "Tell me about the mate bond," Alara said instead. "Everything you know." So he did. How it was rare, occurring in maybe one of every 1,000 Alpha-Omega pairs. How it created a connection deeper than chemistry, a recognition of souls that complemented each other. How completing the bond, the formal mating would merge their strengths, their weaknesses, their very essences. "But completing it while I'm poisoned would only transfer the toxin to you as well," Theron said quietly. "I won't do that to you. Won't trap you in my death. That's not your choice alone." Alara turned to face him, the moonlight painting his features in silver. "The bond works both ways. What if my strength could help you? What if together we're stronger than the poison? Or what if I kill you trying?" His hand cupped her face with devastating gentleness. "I've ended bloodlines and conquered kingdoms, Alara. But I can't risk you. Not for anything." Before she could respond, pain struck him like lightning. Theron gasped, doubling over as black veins suddenly blazed beneath his skin with dark light. The toxin surging through his system with vicious intensity. He collapsed to his knees on the roof, one hand braced against the tiles. Alara dropped beside him, hands on his shoulders. "Breathe, just breathe. I'm here." Her touch eased it somewhat, as it always did. But this attack was worse than she'd seen before. His whole body shook with the effort of containing agony. "Can't," he gasped. "Too much. It's reaching for my heart." Desperation made Alara bold. She pressed her palms fully against his chest, directly over where the poison's darkness was visible beneath his shirt. Heat exploded between them. Not the gentle warmth of their usual connection, but a blazing surge that made Alara cry out. Power flowed from her into him, welled and untamed, washing through his system like a cleansing flood. For a moment, one impossible, beautiful moment, the black veins faded. The pain left Theron's face. He breathed without struggling. Then Alara's hands erupted in purple light. She jerked back in shock, staring at her palms wreathed in amethyst fire that didn't burn. The light pulsed with her heartbeat alive and impossible. "What?" she started. Theron stared at her hands, then at her face, and his expression held wonder mixed with something that looked like recognition. "Your eyes. Alara, your eyes are glowing." She scrambled to the cottage, finding her reflection in the dark window glass. Purple light blazed from her irises like twin stars. As she watched, it slowly faded back to her normal brown, and the fire around her hands died to embers before vanishing completely. "What am I?" she whispered. Theron stood carefully, the brief respite from pain already ending as the toxin reasserted itself. But his gaze never left her face. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." He left that night with promises to return with answers. To search the castle archives for any mention of purple-eyed omegas or healing fire. Alara stood in her cottage surrounded by apple-scented darkness and stared at her ordinary-looking hands. Hands that had blazed with impossible light. Hands that had pushed back 7 years of corruption for a few precious seconds. Whatever she was, it was more than just an Omega who'd survived abuse. Far more. The next day, Theron arrived with Magnus carrying a stack of ancient texts. They spread the volumes across Alara's kitchen table, leather-bound books that smelled of age and secrets. "The castle library has a restricted section," Theron explained, flipping through pages of faded script. "Books about bloodlines thought extinct. Powers that haven't manifested in centuries. And you think I'm connected to these extinct bloodlines? Your healing ability, the purple light, the way you affect the toxin." He looked up from a particularly old tome. "These aren't normal Omega traits," Magnus cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, there's something else. I've been making inquiries about Alara's family." Both of them turned to the scarred guard. Her parents died 12 years ago in what was reported as an accident. Carriage crash on the mountain road. Magnus pulled out a thin file. "But I found witnesses who remember them. Descriptions of her mother that are unusual." He handed Alara a statement taken from an old merchant. She read aloud. "Beautiful woman with dark hair and eyes that glowed purple when she was angry. She could make plants grow faster with just a touch. Some said she was blessed. Others said cursed." Alara's hand trembled on the parchment. "My mother had purple eyes and healing abilities according to other reports." Magnus pointed to another testimony. "She saved a child from drowning once. Witnesses said purple light surrounded the child as your mother pulled water from his lungs." Theron had gone very still. He flipped frantically through the ancient tome before him, scanning pages with desperate intensity. Then he stopped, finger landing on an illustration. A wolf with white fur and purple eyes. "Eclipse bloodline," he read, voice tight. "An ancient alpha line thought to be completely eradicated 25 years ago. They were known for unusual abilities, healing combat prowess beyond normal alphas, and a distinctive transformation. White fur, purple eyes." But I'm Omega," Alara protested. "Are you, Theron looked at her with new understanding. "Or have you been suppressed into believing that?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "Corwin gave me Wolf's Bane," Alara said slowly, memory surfacing. 3 drops every day for 12 years. He said it was to prevent my Omega nature from causing problems." "Wolf's Bane suppresses wolf traits," Magnus said grimly. "It would keep an alpha dormant just as effectively as an Omega." Theron stood abruptly, began pacing the small cottage. "Eclipse bloodline alphas were systematically murdered 25 years ago because they threatened the established power structure. They were too strong, too different. If your parents survived the purge and hid you as an Omega, they were protecting me." Alara's world tilted sideways. Everything she'd believed about herself lies built on poison and fear. "The question is," Theron said, stopping in front of her, "what happens now that you've stopped taking Wolf's Bane, now that your true nature is waking up?" As if in answer, Alara's hands sparked with purple light again. That night alone in her cottage, Alara felt something stirring deep inside. Something that had been caged for 12 years, drugged into silence, beaten down whenever it tried to surface. Her wolf, not the small, timid Omega she'd always imagined, but something else entirely. Something that looked at her with purple eyes and showed teeth too sharp for submission. "You're not prey," it seemed to say. "You never were." Alara looked at her hands, remembering how they'd blazed with healing fire. How Theron's pain had retreated under her touch. If she was Eclipse bloodline, if she was Alpha, not Omega, if everything she'd believed about herself was built on lies designed to keep her weak, what else could she do? She closed her eyes and reached for that stirring presence inside her. The wolf that had been sleeping for 12 years. Wake up, she told it. I'm ready now. The wolf opened one purple eye, and the moon outside her window suddenly seemed very, very full. The transformation started 3 nights later. Alara woke to agony like nothing she'd ever experienced. Worse than glass embedded in her leg. Worse than 12 years of abuse. This was her entire body trying to become something it had been forbidden from being. She staggered from bed, crashed into the kitchen table. Her bones felt like they were breaking and remaking themselves. Her skin burned, her vision blurred purple and brown and purple again. Through the haze of pain, she heard hoofbeats, shouting. The cottage door burst open. Theron filled the doorway, Magnus behind him. It's happening, Theron said, rushing to her side. The transformation. Your wolf is coming through. Make it stop, Alara gasped. Please, it hurts. I know. His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. But you have to let it happen. Fighting it only makes it worse. Trust your wolf. Trust yourself. Another wave of agony crashed through her. Alara screamed, the sound more animal than human. Her hands erupted in claws, black claws tipped with purple light. That's it, Theron encouraged, still holding her steady. Let it come, you're safe. I'm here. You're safe. The change accelerated. Fur rippled across her arms, white as winter snow. Her face elongated into a muzzle. Her legs reformed into powerful haunches. And through it all, purple light blazed from her transforming body like dawn breaking. Then it was done. Alara stood on 4 legs instead of 2, stood nearly 9 feet tall at the shoulder, stood looking at her reflection in the cottage window, and saw a massive white wolf with eyes like amethyst stars. Is this me, she thought in wonder. Her wolf grinned with too many teeth. This is us. Theron knelt before her, and there was no fear in his face, only awe. Eclipse wolf, he whispered. Gods, you are magnificent. Magnus stood frozen in the doorway, his scarred face slack with shock. I've never seen anything like this. The legends didn't do it justice. Alara tried to speak, but only a rumbling growl emerged. She hadn't learned to control this form yet. Hadn't learned what she could do. Then Theron gasped, doubling over as the toxin struck him again. The reprieve from her touch earlier was gone. The poison was accelerating as if it sensed a threat. Without thinking, Alara pressed her massive wolf form against him. Purple light blazed from her fur where they touched, pouring into him in waves. And this time the toxin didn't just retreat, it burned. Black veins beneath Theron's skin suddenly glowed with purple fire, the shadow poison, meeting something stronger, brighter, more ancient. He cried out, but not in pain and shock, as 7 years of corruption began to dissolve. It's working, Magnus breathed. The Eclipse Wolf's healing. It's actually destroying the toxin. Alara poured more power into Theron, instinctively understanding what needed to happen. The mate bond amplified everything, turning her healing fire into a purging flame that tracked down every trace of shadow poison and burned it to ash. Theron convulsed in her grip, or were they paused now as the toxin fought back? But it was losing. Inch by inch, vein by vein, the darkness retreated before ancient light. Finally, with one last surge of purple fire, the poison broke. It fled Theron's system like water from a cracked dam, pouring out through his skin as black smoke that dissipated in the night air. The last traces of 7 years of dying gone in minutes under an Eclipse Wolf's touch. Theron collapsed against her white fur, breathing hard. But breathing, the black veins were gone. The tremor in his hands stilled. The pain that had haunted him for 7 years finally impossibly ended. You did it, he gasped. You actually cured it. Alara felt herself shifting back, bones reforming, fur receding, the transformation reversing now that she knew how to control it. She knelt beside Theron in human form, naked but too stunned to care. I'm Eclipse bloodline. I'm Alpha. You're incredible. He pulled her against him, and the mate bond sang between them, stronger than ever. You're everything. Magnus tactfully turned his back, though his voice held approval. The legends said Eclipse wolves could heal with their power. Looks like the legends were right. But they weren't finished yet, because outside the cottage, orange light bloomed against the night sky. Fire. And with it came screaming. Theron was on his feet, instantly moving with strength and speed he hadn't possessed in years. What? The village, Magnus said, grimly pointing toward the horizon where Alara's cottage bordered the nearest settlement. Something's burning. They ran. Alara grabbed a cloak to cover herself, her newly awakened wolf senses screaming danger ahead. The village was chaos, 3 buildings ablaze, villagers fleeing in panic. And in the center of the destruction stood a figure Alara recognized even through smoke and flames. Seraphine. The Alpha King's sister wore black leather meant for combat, her blonde hair pulled back severely. And she wasn't alone. 20 rogues surrounded her wolves who'd rejected pack law, who killed for gold rather than honor. I gave you a chance to come quietly, Seraphine called out when she saw Theron approaching, to acknowledge that this kingdom needs a real leader, not one who throws away alliances for Omega whores. Seraphine, Theron's voice was steel. Standing. Now. No, she smiled beautiful and terrible. Mother is in prison because of you. Our allies withdrawn. The kingdom's stability shattered. All because you couldn't control yourself or around one damaged servant. Her gaze found Alara. And now I discover she's not even Omega. That she's been hiding Eclipse blood this whole time. She laughed brittle and sharp. How convenient. The dead bloodline's last heir just happens to be your mate. This ends now, Theron growled. Send the rogues away, we'll talk. We're past talking, brother. Seraphine gestured and the rogues closed in. I'm taking the throne, and you're both dying tonight. They attacked as one unit, 20 rogues transforming mid-leap into wolves of brown and gray and black. Professional killers who'd done this before. But they'd never faced an Eclipse wolf. Alara felt the transformation take her faster, this time easier. One moment human, the next, a massive white wolf blazing with purple light. She met the first 3 rogues in midair, claws raking across their bodies with force that sent them flying. They hit the ground and didn't rise, purple burns marking where she'd touched them. Theron transformed into his black wolf form, larger and stronger than she'd ever seen him, free of the toxin's constraints at last. He fought with devastating efficiency, teeth and claws, ending rogue after rogue. Together they were unstoppable. The mate bond connected them mid-battle, allowing them to move as one. Where Theron drove enemies toward her, Alara's purple fire burned them down. Where she was surrounded, Theron tore through her attackers from behind. 15 rogues fell in as many minutes. The last 5 broke and ran, which left only Seraphine. The blonde woman transformed into a golden wolf, smaller than Alara, but fast and vicious. She launched at Alara's throat, fangs aiming for the kill. Alara caught her mid-leap, purple light blazing. She slammed Seraphine to the ground and held her there with one massive paw. Yield her, wolf growled. Seraphine thrashed, snapping at Alara's leg. Drew blood but couldn't break free. Theron patted forward, his black wolf form still imposing even without the toxin weakening him. He shifted to human, standing over his captured sister. You tried to kill me, he said quietly. You hired the rogues. You burned the village. And you did it all because you couldn't accept that power means protecting the weak, not exploiting them. Seraphine shifted back to human, as well pinned beneath Alara's wolf form. You're weak, she spat. Father would have never. Father was a tyrant who ruled through fear. Theron cut her off. I'd rather lose the kingdom than become him. He looked at Alara. Your choice. She tried to kill us both. By law, you have the right to end her. Alara felt her wolf's desire for vengeance, for justice delivered through fangs and claws. Seraphine had caused so much suffering, pushing her down at the gala, supporting Corwin's abuses, trying to murder Theron. But killing her would make Alara the same, would turn justice into revenge. Slowly, Alara shifted back to human, stood naked in the firelight but powerful in ways that had nothing to do with clothes. Exile, she said, like Corwin, let her live with the consequences of her choices. Theron nodded. Seraphine Blackwell, you are stripped of title and rank, exiled from these territories permanently. If you return, the exile becomes execution. Guards arrived as he spoke, summoned by the fire and fighting. They hauled Seraphine to her feet, bound her wrists. As they led her away, she looked back at Alara one final time. You think you've won, but the nobles will never accept an Eclipse wolf as queen. They'll tear this kingdom apart before they... Let them try, Alara said quietly, and meant it. The fires were extinguished. The dead rogues removed. The village began to rebuild. And as dawn broke over the mountains, Theron took Alara's hand. The mate bond, he said, we should complete it, officially, if you're willing. She looked at this man who'd rewritten his kingdom for 7 women who didn't matter to anyone but him. Who'd risked civil war for justice. Who'd chosen her despite every reason to walk away. I'm willing, she said. And under the rising sun, an Alpha King and an Eclipse wolf joined their lives completely. The bond blazing between them like purple starfire, visible for miles as it completed. When they finally pulled apart, both were marked. A silver crescent on Alara's throat. A purple star on Theron's chest right over his heart, where the toxin used to live. Permanent, eternal, unbreakable. My queen, Theron said and kissed her again. The coronation took place in the Great Hall before 1,000 witnesses. Alara wore a gown of purple silk that matched her eclipse wolf's eyes. A crown of silver wolves sat on her dark hair, and when Theron placed his hand over hers on the throne's armrest, the mate bond hummed between them strong as ever. Citizens of the realm, Theron's voice carried through the hall, I present Alara Blackwell, Eclipse Wolf, and Queen of these territories. The applause wasn't universal. Some nobles still resented the changes, still whispered about an Omega no Alpha who'd risen too far too fast. But most cheered, because in 6 months, Alara had proven herself in ways that mattered. She'd opened sanctuaries for abused Omegas in every territory. Elena ran a healing house using methods Alara taught her. Sarah's school educated 50 children whose parents couldn't afford tutors. Mira's sanctuary housed 30 women fleeing violence. The other victims thrived as well. Joel's sheep farm employed 20 formerly homeless Omegas. Cassandra's mill provided fair wage work. Thea's shop sold goods made by women rebuilding their lives. And Alara's hand rested on her slightly rounded belly where their daughter grew strong. She'll be born free, Theron murmured low enough only Alara heard. No chains, no fear, no wondering if her nature makes her disposable. She'll be Eclipse, Alara agreed. And she'll know her mother crawled through blood to reach a king who chose justice. From the crowd, 6 women smiled. Sisters in survival, sisters in triumph. The broken had saved each other, and kingdoms would never be the same.